welcome.
The Pathology Innovation Collaborative Community is a regulatory science initiative that aims to facilitate innovations in pathology, as well as advance safety and effectiveness evaluation. The PIcc Collaborative Community aims to harmonise approaches to speed delivery to patients through collaboration in the pre-competitive space. The PIcc is open to all stakeholders, public or private, including but not limited to academia, industry, healthcare providers, patients, and advocacy groups. Meetings of this kind are an example of lawful activity under federal antitrust law because the focus of the meeting is on government action or policy, including the industry's responses or positions taken with respect thereto. However, antitrust monitoring is needed for companies' own protection since they are direct competitors meeting together. These meetings need to stay within protected subject matters and need to be monitored so that they do not stray off into inappropriate areas, such as pricing and price terms, sales and service territories for particular products, customers and customer territories, each company's individual decisions regarding selection of suppliers or customers, marketing plans and especially future marketing plans or new product offerings, other proprietary or competitively sensitive information. Today's meeting will follow the written agenda and there will be no discussion of pricing or other prohibited topics. If the discussion veers into those topics, we will terminate the discussion. If you have any questions or concerns about the propriety of the discussion, please raise it immediately, and we will take a break to determine how best to proceed. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium acts as the formal convener, and we will follow their conflict of interest policy. For additional information, we defer to our Code of Conduct and our website, www.pathologyinnovationcc.org. We look forward to moving the field forward.
All right, welcome everyone. It's August 25th, 2021. We're still on Earth, still the same universe, and if you don't know where you are, you're in the Pathology Innovation Collaborative Community Steering Committee meeting with a lot of updates. So despite the summer break and many folks doing vacation, hopefully with safe traveling, we have a couple of updates, and I think within a few moments Ulla will share today's agenda, but I want to jump right in, and as always all the information as well as this recording will be made available on our website that you just saw here. If you don't know it, digitalpathologyalliance.org, and at the About section you will find our Code of Conduct and what a collaborative community is, what our charter is, and there's also a conflict of interest policy in a short 2-minute video on the bottom that explains the rules of engagement, that we stay away from competitive endeavors, etc. So in the meantime, you should have today's meeting agenda, and I jump right in to what we're going to discuss today. Let me just switch over here. Can you see the PowerPoint? I hope that works. Perfect, thank you. So, the first item is a set of announcements that is hidden behind this conglomerate of acronyms here. And there are 2 small business contract opportunities referred to as Further 444, which is evaluation data sets as so-called medical device development tools for testing cancer technology. So this is MDDT referring to a specific FDA program that we mentioned previously. And then there's 1442, which is quantitative biomarkers as MDDT for cancer. And that could potentially be a total of 8 awards. And we can briefly go over the details. And coupled to that, and probably part of a much larger plan, is an RFI about a national plan for AI implementation that came from the White House. So I wanted to briefly go over that and then obviously solicit additional ideas for some of these projects. So the first one here, first of all, these are fast-track proposals in a current contract and in a Cyber Concept Award framework. You see this also here by the root of where this RFA is. You see the budget total cost for phase 1, which is the initial up to 12 months, typically 6 to 12 months, is $400,000, and it goes all the way up to $2 million for up to 2 years if solicited, for phase 2. Now, we won't have time to go over all the details, but I think many of you have already either conceptualized either an idea for a tool for testing of cancer technologies or have already submitted some concrete proposals. And I just wanted to briefly go over this and the 2 other grants, and then maybe we can open it up for discussion of whether we should, solicit this group of stakeholders with the various projects that are ongoing to consider submitting, something through some of the companies or, vendors present. The second one is focused on biomarkers. You see this is effectively a replica, but the content is slightly different. And then the third element, which I wanted to include here, is currently a request for information on an implementation plan for a national AI research resource. So this goes very well in alignment with what we consider here as diagnostic tools, probably multimodality, including radiology, but what would such a resource look like? And you see the White House Office of Science and Technology requests information, and there's still an open comment period that ends as of today in 7 days. There are 2 very interesting public comments. I won't go into this because we can't comment on pending issues here in terms of legislation, but this plan itself kind of outlining what a task force look like, and they're looking for concrete, input on what these resources could look like. So I jump back real quick. So these are sort of 3 related proposals, 2 focused on MDDT proposals and 1 more on AI. So I think that was a very quick and a brief overview. I don't know, Brandon, if you want to comment a bit on sort of, for those who are new in this group, what an MDDT is and or what you think of these proposals, and maybe provide a little bit of a background from the FDA perspective. Good seeing you, by the way.
Yeah, for sure. We actually did a webinar for these 2 contract opportunities yesterday, and there will be slides, and I think I will be able to share them with this group about a little bit more details. There was the front end, which is kind of describing the contract pathway at NCI for the small business. Actually, what does SBIR mean? I can't remember, but it's the SB is small businesses. So these are contracts. They're not grant mechanisms. So there was some discussion about the difference of those. And then myself and a colleague and some other colleagues talked about the MDDT program and these 2 specific awards. And then someone came on at the end to talk about kind of how the budget works with these contracts versus grants. And so, but the MDDT, the Medical Device Development Tool Program, is something we've mentioned many times here, but really it is encapsulated in these 2 items. And really the project that I'm doing is targeted to pitch a medical device development tool. So when we have all of our data, we are going to submit it to the agency to get qualified. And once that data is qualified, then it can be used to evaluate an algorithm. So you can see it's a tool to evaluate the algorithm. So anything you can imagine that could be a tool to evaluate a medical device. Phantoms are another great example that really work for me in imaging, where you have a calibration phantom or a calibration slide. If it was helpful in evaluating a medical device, it would qualify. And the web page on medical device development tools, all you have to do is search for those words, and you'll see the web page, and it's been newly updated. So there's a lot of information, including the MDDT tools that have been qualified. So you can get an example, you can see those examples out there. And I think there's like 9 or a dozen so far, but we're really pushing to beef up the communications on this, because we really feel like these tools can make the whole submission process more transparent, give manufacturers things that they need to that they don't have to then describe and create and justify. They can just use the tool in their submission. And that's the whole point, is to make the submissions easier for the sponsor and for the agency. Once we qualify a tool, we shouldn't have to ask any more questions. And in fact, we're not supposed to ask any more questions. It all be encapsulated in the MDT public document. And the key there is it going to be a context of use? So the data set that I am doing and the data set that's mentioned here, is the context of use really identifies, what is the basic algorithm that you're expecting would use this data? What is the clinical population? What is the performance evaluations that can be created? So all of that is wrapped into this context of use. And that's what's kind of differentiates it from a medical device.
Mm-hmm. Quick shout out to Ed Majurison, who's also on the call. Thanks, Ed. For those who don't know, he's the director of the Office of Science and Engineering and one of the fathers of the MDDT program. Ed, do you want to quickly make a few comments as well?
Yeah, well, I think Brandon described it really well. Thanks, Brandon. I just wanted to maybe say a couple of words about how we got to where we are with the NCI, because we've been trying to get something going with them for ages. And it really is, to me, the perfect blend of the MDDT process and the collaborative community process, because we're trying to stimulate a lot of these tools because they can be used from a kind of collaborative community perspective very far upstream, so that you can stimulate a lot of the innovation. People are using common tools, common data sets, common phantoms, for example, as Brandon mentioned. And that just reads the whole way through the development process of the technology and a product. So we've been working on NCI and various other institutes at NIH for quite some time. And we finally had a breakthrough, because one of the tools that we'd actually developed within CDRH, it related to high intensity therapeutic ultrasound, and the NCI small business program suddenly realized that it was a very, very efficient funding model for them, because they could fund one SBIR company at relatively small money to develop tools or phantoms or data sets or quantitative biomarkers, but all their other SBIR companies in that same space could then use it. So that was the hook we kind of got to them. And I thought it was just worth mentioning that briefly before I hand back to you, Joe, because we are expecting and anticipating there's going to be quite a lot more of these calls coming up, because we have managed to make the other institutes somewhat jealous of NCI. So that's very good news. And we'll share that. That's always the way to get them interested. So I think that we'll be able to have a lot more of these. Hopefully, a lot of them will relate to this space as well. So I don't see these as really a one-off in terms of the MDDT funding. And I think it's a good mechanism to bring everyone together. But fundamentally, that's how we sold it to NCI. So if anyone in the collaborative community is thinking about going ahead with these, we can't actually, I think it would be potentially a conflict for us to give too much advice. But certainly the way that NCI are looking at it is that it's very good from everything we talk about in the collaborative community. It's about working on the same hymn sheet for pre-competitive areas, and it gives them a very efficient funding model. So I think that covers it. I think pretty much we can answer questions, of course, Joe, but I'll hand back to you rather than hogging the time.
Well, in the name, although unaccounted, but like for the whole community, I can only express my gratitude for all the channels that had to be pushed and pulled and to get this off the ground. I think this is extremely important, because for now, it's like getting academic medical centers involved, doing the research for better regulatory sciences is so critical. And I can only imagine how much work it is to get these, this is like across the executive branch, right? This is like multiple different branches working together. So I think this shows that the program hopefully will function, but having this funding opportunity out there also for small businesses will create sort of a more sustainable pathway. So thanks for that. In terms of questions, I know you can't answer or give like concrete hints, but do you mind sort of like quickly explaining sort of for those who are not too familiar with the pathway, what, like, of course, data sets versus quantitative biomarkers seem to be of biggest interest, but I know Ed, Brandon, Katie, everyone from the FDA is on the call know what we kind of work and aim towards, meaning, trying to ease the pathway towards regulatory approvals for AI tools, for quantitative biomarkers, etc. Do you mind, like, maybe mentioning briefly what the FDA is currently struggling with? And I know you can't go into details of submissions, but just sort of like in broad strokes, what seem to be of highest interest.
Yeah, well, I think that there's lots of areas. From my perspective, the first thing to state is that when we talk about MDDTs, they are a thing, a tool or a methodology or a phantom, which allows us and innovators to evaluate the safety or effectiveness of a device using a common tool of some description. So that's what separates them from a diagnostic or an actual device. And I think the things that we're fundamentally struggling with really is getting sufficient capacity in that sort of program, because at the moment we've had about a dozen or so qualified within a specific context of use, which again, Brandon talked about. And really to have an impact on the entire industry, given that we regulate 233,000 types of device, we've got to build capacity in this area. So that's what we're trying to do. We don't have a particular view about one tool is better than another. Our view on all of them will be that it is fit for purpose within its context of use. And given that, then the more we have, the more kind of standardized our whole language is between us. So that makes it easier for innovators. I, in my semi-youth, was CEO of a startup. And the first question every prospective investor asked us was, have you talked to FDA? And if the answer was yes, you can then have another conversation. But the second part, one of the answers would be great to be able to give would be, I've evaluated my technology using a tool that is qualified by FDA. It gives it a stamp of authority. So we think we can help de-risk and accelerate a lot of the upstream early parts of it. But to really have an impact with all of those types of device, we've got to just get going. And I think naturally then we'll start thinking about a way of maybe doing third-party accreditation for tools and things like that. That's certainly within the realm of possibilities. But that's the biggest thing on our minds really for the MDTs at the moment. It's got to be a very non-burdensome process. And I think we're at that point now. But fundamentally, we need more than a few dozen to make it have a real impact on innovation across the whole community. Does that make some sense, Joe?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ed. You probably noticed my computer just died. I hope you can still hear me. I probably need to restart, but Ulla, maybe you.
So, oh, hey,
perfect. Does that mean Joe's back?
Hello, yes.
Yeah, I just gave a little bit of background on some predetermined change control plans that I've seen in a general sense, and hopefully everybody got the spirit of there's a lot of detail that we're looking for, and if there was a medical device development tool that offered a framework or a template, showed simulations for what one of these PCCPs could look like, that would, to me, that would make my job a lot easier.
Perfect.
Does it have to be in the form of a tool? Because a lot of what you're talking about is frameworks guidelines, kind of hypotheses, theories about what's the best way to iterate. When you mentioned change control, I actually was trying to figure out, and you confirmed what I was thinking, is like versioning, iteration, and there's many different spins to that. You could think of the AI matching to use case. You can expand the number of use cases. You know, initially it was validated for this, but now it's expanded to this. That's a versioning type of thing. And so
Yes.
how to create a framework around that particular item as well as other types of items, that seems like a whole science in itself. And so when you mention tool, in some ways it locks it down in my mind, in terms of the framework there. What if it was just in terms of studying the science behind frameworks of how you're going to do change control, as you've stated it? Would that be under the funding opportunity if you were to say that you'd be studying how to do that in terms of, let's say if you wanted to expand the number of use cases, then this is the framework to do that? Or does it have to be in a
Yeah, not for the SB, not for the NCI contract opportunity. They want data and they want tools. Certainly that science would be really welcome in the community and for us to benefit from. But when we're talking about these programs, they're looking for tools that, are fixed in time, but perhaps then there's updates to the tool itself, and that's when you would revisit the FDA to get that new version to be qualified.
Gotcha.
But the science is great. We'd love to see more of that.
Yeah, that's what I was interested in, because it almost sounds like the science has to also be developed. It has to go hand in hand, because you can do use cases, but to do it systematically, that's where the science comes in to go into, because every use case is going to kind of do this patchwork of filling in certain needs, but you're not going to have a nice systematic approach of trying to cover all the versions of change control that are out there. That's why I think where the science comes in.
Right. And that's science.
This is Ed again. They absolutely go hand in hand without a doubt. And as Brandon said, I would absolutely agree that we've got to develop the science before you can actually develop the tools. They kind of don't even really go hand in hand. Unless we've got a base science that feeds into the quality of the tools, they're never going to work properly. But I think that one thing that I forgot to mention, I think is relevant here, is that there are the two steps of the MDDT process, which is the same in this case as the SBIR phase 1 and 2. And the way that it's going to work is that for any tool to eventually make it to a qualified, FDA qualified tool, then step 1 is to, the same as SBIR step 1, is to effectively develop a validation plan for how you would actually qualify the tool. So you have your criteria for success and things like that. And then the second one is developing the evidence that actually shows that it is appropriately whatever you had in your criteria for step 1. So this first step may actually be a place where there might be some scope for developing some science in terms of addressing how you would actually put together the qualification plan. It's difficult to talk in generalities, but it might be possible to do that. But I suspect you're better off looking at other programs within NIH to do that, because there'll be potentially significantly larger grants, I would imagine.
That's very helpful. I mean, tying into this, I just want to continue it on, because Joe, he had mentioned about the NAIRR thing, and they were requesting that RFI, and in comment to the science, is it something that all of us on the call would be interested in formulating, that we need more science in this change control paradigm? Because I'm not aware of any funding opportunities, and if there is not, then that's a gap. That's a gap where somebody, NSF or somebody, can try to help fill in terms of encouraging the science behind change control and what a future of that looks like.
So I'm not aware of something specifically addressing change control, but there is a specific branch and section in NIH about implementation science, and they have a specific section of methodologies and frameworks, and that entire funding was pivoted towards COVID implementation. So I know that that's existing. I don't know of any current, RFAs or, any specific notifications, but I think that falls well within the scope of what we are trying to accomplish with this group here. So it's somewhat related to some of the projects that I know Jitesh and MDIC have been involved in, but maybe, Ola, we can make a note and then continue the discussion next time, because we're already a bit over time, and I wanted to definitely touch upon some of the other projects, and we have sort of a packed agenda. So let's keep this one quick additional note, which is also relevant. I think this will be on our calendar. There's, a workshop in September. This is coming from the next generation sequencing and radiomics work group. We will distribute this, so I won't go into details. I just wanted to give a brief shout out. There are 4 new projects that I want to just cursory mention briefly and point you to the correct directions on our website for details. You can see the quick sort of like there's a privacy, a valid act, and information blocking, and a so-called Seer Microscope project. And I want to briefly go through these. Just quickly, I want to show you this because it's such a cool slide that Ola has put together. I mean, look at that. That's cool. In any case, so the privacy pilot project. This was started from 2 discussions, and there are several different components here. You see privacy minus pilot minus project is in the URL. You find this. There's a link to a meeting next week, Wednesday, September 1st. So if you're interested in collaborating or contributing to this project, it's currently run by 3 people. Paul, I don't know if he's on the call, but he's the CEO and leader of the Biodata Consortium. And what we're looking for here is anyone interested in privacy issues related to National Patient Identifier, GDPR, HIPAA, and state-level privacy changes. If you've been on this call before, we touched upon this, and we're trying to create sort of a resource so people can come to this, let's call it website for now. It could also be external or hosted by some of our partnering organizations finally, but to really outline sort of like first the scope of what the privacy issues are that touch upon this group. And there's, an outline for like, privacy state maps. I think if you're in California, you probably know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of other states that have already like started revising or extending privacy rules and laws. So this is P3, PIcc, whatever you want to call it. It's a privacy pilot. Joe, do you want to mention something briefly about sort of the scope and interaction with API here as well, and your work on the National Patient Identifier?
I guess that in terms of what I was envisioning, and then I'm just putting on my president hat, and for transparency, my presidency ends at the end of this year, but I wanted to leave some things for API that, I wanted to create a collaborative community, which this is too, but just a lot of us cross-pollinate on different organizations, and my hope is for API that we'd have a landing spot for, particularly if you're interested in privacy issues or regulatory issues in AI, that we can loop back to the Alliance page over here. But in some ways, it'll be a place, it's kind of similar what I had in mind to Microsoft Community, where if you have a trouble, currently we use the API listserv to do things, and it's not the most scalable 2020 version of way to do things. And I thought of creating a community where the stuff is there online. You can look at what's been said in the past, and you can link in to other communities, other sites where they're much more engaged in things. And so that's kind of what I had in mind. So hopefully if we create that community, which I'm hoping to have the website within the next couple of months or so, it links back to here and people can join. Now, in regards to this project, Joe and I were sort of talking this morning, and I know there's several folks on the CAP call. I got interviewed a couple months ago about a national patient identifier because it blew up on the API listserv. It was a very hot topic, and it continues to stay as a hot topic about whether we should have one or not. And I sort of gave a little bit of a compromise, a little bit of an out-of-the-box solution that I'm not sure if that CFP today has been published yet. But we're being held up because we don't have a way to identify patients. COVID it exposed that. I mean, we didn't have a way to identify test results, share them, because we couldn't identify, we really didn't know identities and things like that. And there's a lot of resistance, and it's valid about what they had. So I proposed a mechanism that might override that. And it involves tokenizations, and it involves not actually creating a national patient identifier, but it does create a national patient identifying engine or mechanism. So there is a way to do it without passing around identifiers. And I sort of provide in that viewpoint some opinions and whether they're technically feasible or not. Hopefully they are. I ran them by my information security officer. But if we were to go down this out of the box solution, you can identify patients without passing around identifiers, which is the dangerous part. And it alleviates the need of actually being able to identify patients across the country, because that's really a holdup on many different fronts. We're not able to share data very easily because we're still reconciling identities of patients. And I think the old argument that, having something like this around, we live in modern times. We have different ways to identify people without passing around things like social security numbers and things like that. We can think more advanced than that. And that's kind of what I was trying to propose. But these are the types of projects that this pilot project is going to involve, things like that, about doing some out of the box things. And Joe and I were talking about this, like, why is it us doing it? I mean, I would have thought information security officers were doing this, but it seems to be we in pathology are thinking about this first. I've been to a lot of these.
I think there are several other, like, I fully second that. One sort of related block or component resource is, of course, the 21st Century Cures Act and information blocking, interoperability. So I think what Joe had just outlined, if you're interested in that, please follow the link that Ulla just pasted, and we can talk about a bit more on this. I think the question on whether privacy and information blocking can be combined in one is probably something of a lot of interest. I see Laura is on the call, and I think you probably know about specifics regarding information blocking and the controversy around that. But I don't know, there's no specific preconceived sort of proposal. It's mostly getting a resource together so pathologists can go to this and find the most relevant and pertinent information. So. Any other quick comments on this? Right, let's move on. The next project was sort of discussed earlier in the last month's meeting, and Shannon Bennett, who's on the call, and I sort of discussed sort of test driving the Valid Act. Now, this is like, of course, not yet a Formula One car. The project is still in the design phase, and the link will outline sort of what we discussed here. So if you haven't heard about it, the Valid Act has been reintroduced in June. It's going to go up for discussion. It's a bicameral proposal and a legislation that will likely change the LDT infrastructure and many, many more things. So the key thing that I wanted to briefly outline here, and again, there's a meeting coming up next week to discuss this, is that we want to not comment on legislation or judge this in any way, shape, or form, but we want to just see what that would mean in concrete terms if we would take 3 use cases and push those as LDTs mentally or as a exercise through the Valid Act. One is a whole slide imaging-based AI application to predict the combined Gleason grade from H&E stained routine FFPE sections. So it's not a straightforward project, but a very straightforward use case. And looking, and I know that there are some commercial solutions here, but what would that look like if we would apply this as one of the IVDs? The second is a PD-L1 immunohistochemical staining for solid tumors, so a companion diagnostics that is, cross-referencing another approved test, seeing what that would look like under Valid, and then a next-generation sequencing assay covering multiple established biomarkers. But here, what would that look like if a lab would implement this? So we can't go into details how we're going to do this, but Shannon, do you want to maybe comment a bit what we were we're aiming to do here?
So I think the genesis of this was, Mayo has worked with another reference laboratory to go through this same thought process for other tests, and we disagreed a lot. And so there's a lot of subjectivity to this. So in talking with Joe, we thought it might be helpful to go through this thought process of, what is the risk classification of some pathology related tests and applications. And importantly, the definition of an in vitro clinical test, which is the new term for LDTs and IVDs, includes software. So AI software would potentially be considered an IVCT. So I think that's one that will be important to kind of walk through.
Thanks, Shannon. So I think if this is not of interest to you, what is? The next project quickly is referred to as Seer Microscope. And this is coming from two, let's say, three slash institutions right now. It is investigating trends in the use of light microscopy. So this is not whole slide imaging. This is light microscopy for the diagnosis of cancer. Now that may sound a little bit old school, but I want to briefly outline what is intended here. So there's a lot of new technologies, cell-free DNA, next-gen sequencing to diagnose cancer based on circulating, tumor fragments, as well as whole slide imaging and/or AI tools. And some cancers can never be biopsied. For example, under certain conditions, let's say certain brain lesions, or if someone's critically ill, you can only get cerebrospinal fluid, but you may not actually get, any cells, but then DNA testing will soon become a new standard. So what we're trying in this project, and this is a collaboration with UNC Chapel Hill and some investigators from the University in Ulm, Germany, is the following. So under these current paradigms, up until recently, I can't put an exact name on it, most diagnoses of cancer have been made using the light microscope. And that has been annotated in publicly available cancer registries that all accumulate into the Seer Cancer Registry. So what we're trying to do here is query the Seer Cancer Registry and other, tangible sources to identify the fraction of cancers diagnosed by the microscope as a baseline for future studies to say, well, what is basically the fraction rate of a clinical call of cancer not done by the microscope, and then as whole slide imaging and cell-free technologies emerge, what would be the regulatory framework to account for that? Because the diagnosis of cancer is obviously, annotated in ICD-10 codes and NACER codes. So bottom line is, to our knowledge, at least from the literature review we've done so far, there's definitely trends for cell-free tumor DNA testing for early detection of cancer and AI as a potential to diagnose based on radiology, etc. But a baseline data set of what is the fraction diagnosed by a microscope is not existing historically, but the Seer database will do this. And Nisha Ramamurthy is, leading the project through UNC Chapel Hill. And so if you want to join, I think there's also a meeting coming up next week to contribute here. And I think this will be a very important. This is planned to become eventually a peer-reviewed publication. This is like a baseline percentage. And I think this is a very cool project that will hopefully provide a good baseline data set. So here are again, sort of in an overview fashion. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday next week, Privacy, Valid Act, and Seer. That's sort of like a quick overview over some of these projects. Without further ado, maybe quick update from the work group leads. Let's start with the payer strategy. I think Laura.
Yeah, I'm afraid we don't have a ton of updates since I've spent the last month trying to get contacts with any of the relevant radiology groups for some context there. The payer group has sort of decided to proceed with a strategy of trying to learn how the CPT codes for AI of radiology were established. And so we're trying to get contacts with the radiology groups to understand the strategy and how they went about getting those established. I haven't been able to get any contacts there. So if anyone knows somebody that they could share their contact info, that would be really, really helpful. Other than that, I think we'll, for the next meeting, the next working group, probably just focus on getting together with some of the other pathology groups that we know and try going that route. So that's unfortunately not a lot of updates, but if anybody has contacts, we would really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. Next, I think there's a brief update from Katie from the Truthing and Validation group.
We had a series of presentations over the past few months that I've linked in the document I shared with Ula, and they range from recordings of a quantitative assessment of our statistical analysis of the HCT project presented by C. Wynn. Brandon on the line presented at the joint statistical meeting for the American Statistical Association this past August. We have had several interns with us over this past summer, and thank you, Ula. And they presented posters, and our interns range from a undergraduate from the University of Chicago to 2 of our high school interns. So you can see their posters at the links attached. And we've also had a very successful internship partnering with the Google Summer of Code program, where a student from India was working with us this past summer to integrate a microscope hardware with the Seer Microscope annotation system that we use for our project. So I hope that you check out all of these and especially support the interns and trainings we've had this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to emphasize the GitHub repository. So this is our pilot study data is publicly available, along with a script demonstrating how to use that data to generate all the figures that I presented at Pathology Informatics. So that GitHub page is, the GitHub name is HTT for high throughput truthing, and has all the data that we've collected so far. That's a nice milestone from us.
It's an amazing accomplishment. Thanks a lot for sharing and making this available. Should be a very good ground truth and starting point for this. Thanks a lot. Marcus, data standards.
Unmute. Hello, everyone. I can't share apparently.
I think Ula can
give you permission. Give me 1
that.
second here. Right, should be good to go.
Okay. So I just wanted to give a brief update about the hackathon activity that we are now conducting for the second time. So for those of you who have not heard about this before, this is an activity that we are conducting as part of the working group 26th pathology of the DICOM Standards Committee. The goal here is to conduct collaborative development and testing of software tools for annotation of whole slide images, but doing so in standard DICOM format so that the annotations or measurements are interoperable and can be exchanged between different devices from different vendors or researchers. We had a first event earlier this year at the ECDP conference in Europe. It was virtually, so kind of like international conference. Now we have a second event in October this year at Pathology Visions, where we're going to summarize the event. The hackathon activity will take place from end of September until mid-October. And there is a link here in our GitHub repository, and I'll paste the link here into the chat, where interested parties can sign up. Maybe just to mention, the hackathon is something that we started relatively recently. It's similar in ideation to what is called DICOM connectathons, where different vendors would usually come together and test prototypes of their devices for interoperability. The idea of the hackathon would be to open this up to a wider audience and allow individuals and academics and everyone who's interested in the field to participate, and to do so relatively openly and without too many strings attached. I'll skip over a couple of the details. You can all read this up in the repository if you're interested, but I just wanted to quickly highlight the use cases that we are focusing on. So we consider two different types of devices for this activity. One is a display system and an analysis system, where the idea would be that we have either a model development workflow where a pathologist or user would draw an annotation in a display system. Those could be stored and then used by a model for training, or we have a model in inference mode that would generate annotations that could then be displayed in a viewer to an expert who could then verify the validation. So with this, I think I've shared the link. Anyone interested, please sign up or reach out if you have any additional questions. And maybe also to mention, we have a weekly call every Tuesday morning as part of Working Group 26. So if you're interested in the annotation work or other activities going on there, please reach out and let us know. We welcome participation from a variety of different stakeholders. So if you're interested in digital pathology or computational pathology, let us know. Any questions?
And that's free?
It's free.
Awesome. Well, that's not usually the case, so I just thought I'd point that out.
Good point. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for the update and for moving these items forward. We look forward to the next updates. Jitesh, updates from the Medical Device Innovation Consortium.
Thanks, Joe. I'm sorry I joined a little late, so I missed the first part of the conversation. But when I joined, I heard that somebody was talking about the change control plan. We at MDIC, we have a working group on the predetermined change control plan, specifically to IVD, in vitro diagnostics. And we have a template which is almost finalized. So if that's relevant, happy to connect you guys with that. And my next update is very relevant to that. We have recently started a new initiative, basically expanding to more into digital health. And some of the change control plan I just mentioned, or we learned from IVD, that we are expanding to broader device categories and areas including continuous glucose monitoring sensors and so on. So there is a lot of IVD as well as device AI/ML related, change control plan related activities happening. And the new work streams are also very related to PIcc program, which FDA had, or leveraged learnings from the PIcc program. So if you have some enthusiasm about that area, please do connect with me. The second update is our Science of Patient Input program. We are doing a survey about the use of digital health technologies. And as you all know, with the COVID, the digital health technologies, mobile health, they're all much popular now, much widely used now. So how the patients and industries are seeing this, and we need to gather some information. We are trying to gather some information. So there is a digital health science patient input survey happening, and it will be super helpful for if you guys could provide some insight and share it. I'll give the link here in the chat. My third update is that both MDIC and NEST are looking for a lot of hiring options. And I don't want to go through the individual list, but if you have candidates, please do spread the opportunities at both NEST and MDIC. That's all from my side.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. It's great, especially regarding the change control. I think the case for quality group I'm fairly familiar with, and there's definitely some overlap here. Last item
Joe,
was,
I'd like to ask,
yeah,
Jitesh, if there's going to be some sort of webinar or unveiling or workshop to share that work.
Which one? The change control plan?
Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the template, the SPS template is almost finished. So the moment we finish it and release it, there will be webinar and more discussion around that. And then our next plan is building that into other product categories.
Great.
Absolutely, yes.
until then, I'll paste the case for quality overview here. All right. The last item before we open it up for some questions was a discussion plus a survey. So as most of you know, Pathology Visions will happen October 17th through 19th in Vegas. I think, Marcus, you just mentioned it, that there's also some DICOM events happening in relation to that. We confirmed today with Abby Norris from the Digital Pathology Association that this will be an in-person, and so far an in-person only meeting, so there will be no hybrid solution, etc. And typically we had an in-person meeting adjacent to typically, you know, the Saturday to the Pathology Visions meeting. And Ulla was kind enough to survey a few people. And the question is, you know, should we have a meeting? Yes. So most people think that we should have a meeting. What type of meeting do you prefer? There's in-person. There was 0% of the people surveyed in person. Most people would prefer 60% remote or hybrid. So I think that's a clear statement. And please, I know this is on the same slide, but please take this as literally black and white. This is PIcc, not DPA, right? And then would you join in person? There was a 40% rate. Yes, they would. So I think I would interpret this, I don't know, Brandon, if you agree, statistically as a 50-50 shot. So it's like half wanted, half don't. So I wanted to just open this. So I think DPA reserved a room for us kindly, which is not cheap. So if there are people going, we can definitely help organize a meeting. But I know that many of you have already contacted me and said that they can't or are not allowed to go. So I wanted to open this up for a brief discussion on, you know, whether we should have it, and it seems that we should have a meeting for half a day to provide an update, and then briefly discuss whether we make that in person or etc.
Hey Joe, this is Scott Blakely. The only comment I have specifically is that please coordinate whatever you're going to schedule with Abby, because the DPA has a number of internal face-to-face meetings that we do, a board of directors meeting and other things on the Saturday and sometimes on the Sunday. And if you schedule your meeting at the same time, there are people who are on both groups and can't be in two places at once. So like myself, for instance. So
thanks a lot. That's a very good comment. I should also mention, just as always, the DPA will make all the presentations and recordings available on their membership website. I didn't want to construe this. This is an in-person meeting, but the material will be available afterwards. But great comment, Scott. So other comments on this? The FDA folks allowed to travel yet?
Nope.
No.
Okay.
We are we're expecting an update sometime soon. It has to be absolutely mission critical, which means facility inspections, basically. And that's it for foreseeable future, Joe.
Yeah, I think that is, one of the biggest, perks to have, like, representation from the regulator. We can have that, of course, also online. But yeah. I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of people value. I'm just being honest, having the chance to
absolutely. And having
talk.
Proper discussions is what we really want to contribute to. It's so valuable. But we have many lords and masters in government, as you know. The only winner on this is my travel budget.
Other comments about sort of the in-person, or because this looks as if people would participate but would likely prefer hybrid and or remote. Marcus, since you mentioned the DICOM group, is this, could you mind explaining that?
I just wanted to comment. So I think there are two different things. One is the conference itself, right? And there are kind of like meetings around that. So the hackathon event that I just mentioned will happen virtually over the internet, and most of that will actually be concluded before the meeting starts. There will be a panel discussion at the meeting itself, which will be it is expected to be in person. So we're still trying to figure out how we're going to do this and who's going to be there. But our DICOM working group meeting will be a hybrid model where we will have a room and there will be some people in a room, but we're going to have this as a virtual teleconference as we would have had it otherwise. So meaning some people may just happen to participate from the same room, but a meeting will essentially be virtual, like the DICOM working group meeting, not independent of the actual conference.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful to, I think one of the key elements from the presentations and from our prior meetings is of course that, from the meeting summaries, I think that if we have an annual meeting, there's typically, sort of the option to have like breakout work group sessions for people to pick and choose of what project they want to contribute and learn a little bit more. I think that's mostly for getting, newer people, acquainted with the various scopes of, the various work groups and projects. I think we can keep that structure and just spend a few hours introducing the topics for those who are new. And I think that was sort of what we did last times. And it's, it's not that much time effort, and it provides folks the opportunity to learn a bit more. And I think that was what was so far discussed. I don't know if there's other ideas what we can do. I think a data collection event would obviously be the best, but I don't think that that's possible, in this sort of current setting. So comments on this?
I have the feeling that the workout sessions would actually work quite well virtually. I think one of the things that we've noticed, doing this in person is also that people, jump around quite a bit, which is nice. But I think having these like pre-structured into, I don't know, Zoom session or Zoom rooms is something I actually liked in the virtual event.
Okay, so we will plan accordingly and make it sort of a definite remote event, with the option of, if there's a lot of people informing us that they will want to be in the room and discuss that, but it doesn't sound like it from the survey or today. So that's very helpful. Thanks a lot. And please keep in mind that there's a lot of projects going on. So hope to talk to you soon. If not, see you next month at the next steering committee meeting.
Thank
Bye.
you.